The Colt Navy 1851 never missed, not once in 16 years. Desert wind carries whispers of a ghost, a woman they say could kill a man before he heard the bullet coming. Some call it legend, some call it justice. The truth lies buried in the blood-soaked soil of a forgotten war. In the scorched emptiness of the Arizona Territory, Falcon's Edge clings to existence like a stubborn wound that refuses to heal. A town of secrets where even the dust holds memories better left undisturbed. They say revenge rides faster than forgiveness. But what happens when both arrive on the same day with the same face carrying the same gun? Tonight, as thunder growls across distant mountains and shadows stretch accusations like across the cracked earth, two storms converge on Falcon's Edge. One brings men who kill for pleasure. The other brings a past that refuses to die. And between them stands a woman with a revolver that's never failed to kill with one shot. The desert sun hung mercilessly over Falcon's Edge, baking the hard-packed dirt of Main Street until it cracked like old leather. A small frontier town clinging to survival in the Arizona Territory, its weather-beaten buildings shimmered in the heat, their wooden facades bleached gray by years of relentless sun. Sarah Morgan stood in her smithy, sweat beading on her brow, as she hammered a red-hot barrel into shape. At 43, she was lean and strong, with chestnut hair streaked with silver, pulled back in a practical braid. Her movements were precise and economical, each strike of the hammer falling exactly where intended, never wasting energy. "Mrs. Morgan," a voice called from the doorway. Sarah didn't look up. "Be with you in a moment, Mr. Cooper." She finished her strike pattern, then plunged the barrel into a water trough. Steam hissed upward as she turned to the rancher waiting patiently by the door. Daniel Cooper was in his 50s, weathered by sun and hard work, his eyes squinting habitually against the glare. "Rifle will be ready tomorrow," she said, wiping her hands on her leather apron. Had to reshape the barrel. Firing pin needed replacing too. Cooper nodded appreciatively. "No rush, just passing by." His eyes drifted to the wall behind her workbench, where a gleaming Colt Navy 1851 revolver rested in a handcrafted shadow box. "Always wondered about that old gun. Museum piece." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "Family heirloom, my father's. Must be special. You keep it cleaner than the town preacher keeps his Bible. Some things deserve respect, Mr. Cooper." The rancher nodded again, sensing he'd brushed against something private. "Well, I'll be back for that rifle tomorrow. Good day, Mrs. Morgan." After he left, Sarah stood motionless, staring at the Colt Navy. The morning light caught the meticulously polished barrel, the worn wooden grip that had molded perfectly to her hand over the years. Every night for 12 years, she'd removed it from its box, cleaned and oiled it, checked the action, then returned it to its place. A ritual as necessary as breathing. The revolver was more than family history. It was her history. Sarah closed the smithy early that afternoon, something she'd done perhaps 3 times in the 12 years since her husband's death. The bell above the door jingled as she locked up, glancing down Main Street toward the sheriff's office. As if summoned by her gaze, Sheriff Ethan Sullivan emerged, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun as he made his way toward her. At 58, Sullivan moved with the careful economy of a man who'd survived long enough to know better than to rush. The silver star on his chest caught the light as he approached, his weathered face grim beneath the brim of his hat. "Evening, Sarah," he said, coming to a stop before her. "Got a moment?" She nodded, leaning against the porch post. "Something wrong, Ethan?" "Telegraph came in from Tucson." Sullivan removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. "Ravenclaw gang hit Cisco Junction. 3 days ride north." Sarah's posture tensed slightly. "How bad?" "7 riders. Killed the sheriff and 2 deputies. Cleaned out the bank, burned half the town." His eyes met hers. "Word is they're moving south." "Toward us." Sullivan nodded. "Federal marshals won't get here for at least 5 days, if at all." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. Sarah and Sullivan had known each other for 12 years, since she and Robert had arrived in Falcon's Edge with little Grace in tow. He'd been the first to welcome them, the first to help when sickness took Grace, and later when Robert died in what folks called a stray bullet from a barroom fight. "Town's planning to form a defense committee," Sullivan continued. "Jacob Dawson's rounding up volunteers. Thought you might have some suggestions." Chiata for defending against 7 professional killers. Yes, run. Sullivan's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. You know these people won't leave. Everything they have is here. He hesitated. You're the best shot in Falcon's Edge, Sarah. I've seen you put 6 bullets through the same hole at 50 paces. Target shooting's different than shooting at men who shoot back. Is it? He held her gaze a moment longer than comfortable. Sarah looked away first. I'll think about it. After Sullivan left, Sarah climbed the stairs to her living quarters above the smithy. The small apartment was as orderly as her workshop. A bed with a handmade quilt, a pine dresser, a rocking chair by the window. On the dresser stood 2 framed photographs, Robert with his serious eyes and gentle smile, and little Grace at 6, just months before the fever took her. Sarah reached beneath her bed, pulling out a cedar box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a gun belt with holster perfectly sized for the Colt Navy revolver. Beneath it was a stack of yellowed papers, the topmost bearing an illustration of a young woman with a determined expression. The name printed below read, Catherine Holloway, alias the Ghost, $500 reward. Sarah traced a finger over the face, her face 16 years younger. Before she was Sarah Morgan Gunsmith's widow, she had been Catherine Holloway Hayes Ranger's deadliest shot. The woman they called the Ghost because her targets never saw her coming. She rewrapped the wanted poster and returned the box to its hiding place. 16 years was a long time. Long enough to build a new life, to love and lose, to carve out a small measure of peace in a place like Falcon's Edge. Now the Ravenclaw gang threatened that peace, and something told Sarah that wasn't the only ghost from the past coming for her. By morning, word of the Ravenclaw gang had spread through Falcon's Edge like wildfire. Sarah found her smithy busier than usual, ranchers and townsfolk bringing in firearms that needed cleaning, repair, ammunition. Heard they cut off the station agent's fingers one by one until he opened the safe, Frank Jenkins said as Sarah repaired the firing pin on his Winchester. The grizzled rancher leaned against her counter, chewing nervously on an unlit cigar. People talk, Sarah replied, her hands never pausing in their work. Stories grow with each telling. Jenkins shook his head. This ain't just talk. My nephew rode with the burial detail. Said it was the worst thing he'd ever seen. Sarah looked up, meeting Jenkins' anxious gaze. What would you have me say, that we should all pack up and flee? Course not, Jenkins muttered. Just saying a person ought to be prepared. Then prepare, Sarah replied, simply returning to her work. Not by spreading fear, but by being ready. The bell above the door jingled again. Sarah glanced up to see Dr. Elizabeth Palmer entering, medical bag in hand. At 37, Palmer was one of the few educated women in the territory, having studied in Philadelphia before answering the call for medical practitioners in the West. Her blonde hair was pinned up beneath a practical hat, her clothes simple but well made. Morning, Sarah, she said, setting her bag on the counter. How's business? Busy, Sarah nodded toward Jenkins. Everyone suddenly remembered their firearms need attention. Dr. Palmer smiled tightly. Same at my office. 3 cases of nervous constitution this morning. She lowered her voice. People are scared, Sarah. They should be, Sarah said quietly, returning to the Winchester. But fear won't keep them alive. After Jenkins left with his repaired rifle, Dr. Palmer stayed behind. The 2 women had formed an unlikely friendship over the years. The quiet gunsmith and the educated doctor, both outsiders in their way, both holding pieces of each other's confidences. Andrews insisting on joining Dawson's defense committee, Palmer said, referring to her scholarly husband. The man can barely light a lantern without burning himself. Sarah set down her tools. Keep him away from it if you can, Elizabeth. This isn't going to end well. Palmer studied her friend's face. You know something about these men. I know men like them, Sarah replied. They won't just take money and leave. They'll make an example of this town. Then what do we do? Sarah's gaze drifted to the Colt Navy in its shadow box. I don't know yet. The door opened again, this time admitting Sheriff Sullivan and a stranger. The newcomer was tall and lean, dressed in a dark suit that seemed too formal for the frontier. His face was clean-shaven, handsome in a harsh way, with watchful eyes that moved deliberately around the room, cataloging everything. When those eyes landed on Sarah, something flickered in their depths. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation. Sarah, this is Mr. James Smith, Sullivan said. Just arrived on yesterday's stage. Says he's looking for investment opportunities. Mrs. Morgan. Smith removed his hat, revealing dark hair, streaked with premature gray at the temples. His voice carried the soft drawl of the Deep South. Pleasure to make your acquaintance. Sarah nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Welcome to Falcon's Edge, Mr. Smith. Not much to invest in around here. The mines played out years ago. Smith smiled thinly. There's always opportunity for those who know where to look. His gaze locked with hers, and in that moment Sarah knew. This wasn't James Smith. This was Maxwell Harrison's son of Judge Samuel Harrison of Laredo, Texas. The boy who'd watched his father die by her hand 16 years ago, now a man grown and hunting. All these years she'd feared this moment, prepared for it, and now it had arrived on the same day the Ravenclaw gang threatened the town. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing. Mr. Smith staying at the hotel. Sullivan continued, oblivious to the silent recognition passing between them. Said he might need some work done on his firearms. I'd be happy to oblige, Sarah said evenly. My shop's open from sunrise to sunset. I'll keep that in mind. Smith replaced his hat. Good day, Mrs. Morgan. As he turned to leave, Sarah caught the subtle bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his well-tailored jacket. Not just hunting then, armed and hunting. After Sullivan and Smith departed, Sarah stood motionless behind her counter, her mind racing. Two threats bearing down on Falcon's Edge, one from without, one from within. If the Ravenclaw gang arrived while Harrison was here, the situation would become exponentially more dangerous. She had decisions to make, and quickly. That evening, the town hall overflowed with anxious citizens. Jacob Dawson, owner of the saloon, had organized the meeting, his booming voice cutting through the murmur of concerned voices. Folks, we all know why we're here, he began, standing at the front of the room. The Ravenclaw gang's coming, and the federal marshals won't get here in time. We need to decide what we're going to do. I say we give them what they want, Harvey Thompson, the elderly postmaster, called out. Money can be replaced. Lives can't. A chorus of disagreement rose from the crowd. And what happens to the next town they ride into? Daniel Cooper countered. They'll know frontier towns are easy pickings. We need to fight, Frank Jenkins added. Defend what's ours. Sarah stood at the back of the room watching the townspeople debate. Most had no idea what they were proposing. They'd never faced men like the Ravenclaw gang. Killers who enjoyed their work, who saw mercy as weakness. Mrs. Morgan. Dawson called, spotting her. You've been quiet. What do you think? All eyes turned to her. Sarah felt Harrison's, Smith's gaze most acutely watching from the corner of the room. The Ravenclaw gang isn't just a group of common thieves, she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. They're killers who enjoy their work. Victor Blackwood was a Confederate guerrilla during the war. His brother Luke rode with Quantrill's raiders. The others are cutthroats and murderers, each with a price on his head. A murmur rippled through the crowd at her detailed knowledge. How do you know all this? Someone called. I read the wanted posters, Sarah replied smoothly. Sheriff Sullivan received them from Tucson. Sullivan nodded confirmation, though his eyes held a question. If you stand against them, Sarah continued, they will try to kill you. Not wound, not scare. Kill. Is that understood? The room grew quiet as the reality of her words sank in. So what do we do? Martha McCreary, the hotel owner, asked, her voice small. Sarah took a breath. Anyone who wants to leave should do so now. Head east toward Tucson in groups, taking only what you can carry. Those staying need to prepare for the worst. She stepped forward, moving to the front of the room. I can help train those willing to fight. Show you how to use cover, how to make each shot count. But I won't lie to you. Even with preparation, our chances are slim. As the meeting broke up, people clustered in groups discussing options, making plans. Sarah found herself approached by several men volunteering for what Dawson was calling the town watch. Cooper, the Sloan brothers from the livery stable. Miller, the blacksmith, and surprisingly, Jacob Dawson himself. Figured if I was going to suggest a town watch, I ought to join myself, Dawson explained, noting her raised eyebrow. Meet behind my shop tomorrow at noon, Sarah told them. Bring whatever firearms you intend to use. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah felt Harrison approaching before she saw him. He moved with the deliberate confidence of a predator, positioning himself so they couldn't be overheard. "Quite knowledgeable about outlaws, Mrs. Morgan," he said quietly. "Almost as if you've had personal experience." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "This territory breeds familiarity with violence, Mr. Smith. A woman alone learns to pay attention." "Indeed." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I find it interesting that your husband died exactly one day after a certain inquiry agent passed through town asking questions. Struck by a stray bullet in a saloon fight, I believe." "Very convenient." Sarah's hand inched toward the pocket of her skirt, where a small derringer rested. "Are you implying something, Mr. Smith?" "Not at all," Harrison replied smoothly. "I'm merely noting a pattern. It's an occupational hazard. I notice patterns." "And what occupation is that exactly?" Harrison merely tipped his hat. "Good evening, Mrs. Morgan. I'm sure we'll speak again soon." As he moved past her toward the door, Sarah turned to watch him go, a growing certainty settling in her stomach. James Smith, if that was indeed the name he was using, wasn't just here for her. His appearance now, just as the Ravenclaw gang approached, couldn't be coincidence. The question was whether he would move against her before or after Blackwood arrived, and which threat she should address first. Sarah slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with faces from the past. Judge Harrison in his black robes, the moment of recognition in his eyes when he realized who she was and why she'd come. Robert smiling in the sunlight of their early days in Falcon's Edge. Grace laughing as she chased butterflies in the field behind their home. And darker memories, gunfire in the darkness, men falling before her cold blood staining the Texas dirt. She woke before dawn drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. After washing and dressing, she moved silently to her workbench downstairs. The shop was dark, lit only by a single lantern. Sarah removed the Colt Navy from its shadow box, checking the action, with practiced hands loading each chamber with fresh cartridges. The weight of it was familiar, like greeting an old friend, or confronting an old demon. 16 years since she'd carried it as a weapon rather than a memento. 16 years since she'd been Catherine Holloway. She holstered the Colt and slipped outside, locking the smithy behind her. Main Street lay quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, the buildings silent sentinels against the star-filled sky. Sarah made her way to the small rise that overlooked the Western Trail, the route the Ravenclaw gang would likely take into town. As the first pink streaks of dawn colored the horizon, she settled behind a large boulder, drawing the Colt with smooth precision. For the next hour she practiced, drawing, aiming, dry firing at imaginary targets. Each motion was fluid, economical, the muscle memory returning as if she'd never stopped. By the time the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Sarah's confidence had solidified into certainty. If it came to it, she would be ready. The woman who had been the ghost hadn't disappeared entirely. She'd just been dormant, waiting. Sarah returned to her shop as the town began to stir, replacing the Colt in its shadow box. No one would know anything had changed. Not yet. At noon, the volunteers for the town watch gathered behind her smithy. 5 men of varying ages, each looking both nervous and determined. Sarah had set up a series of targets against the back wall. Bottles, cans, and crude silhouettes drawn on wood. "Sheriff Holt says you've all volunteered to defend the town," she began, her voice carrying across the yard. "That's commendable. It's also potentially suicidal if you don't know what you're doing." She paced before them, assessing each man. "First, let's see what we're working with. Mr. Cooper, take position at that line. 5 shots at the bottles." Cooper stepped forward, raising his Winchester to his shoulder. He fired deliberately, hitting 3 of the 5 bottles. Not bad, but not good enough. The others took their turns. The Sloan brothers managed 2 hits each. Miller hit 4, but took too long between shots. Dawson surprised her by hitting all 5, though his stance was poor. "All right," Sarah said when they'd finished. "Let's start with the basics. Shooting is about breathing, balance, and patience. You're not just pointing a gun, you're extending your will through the barrel." For the next 2 hours, Sarah worked with the men, correcting stances, teaching them about cover and concealment, showing them how to make each shot count. Cooper already showed considerable proficiency, the others less so, but all were willing to learn. "Same time tomorrow," she instructed as they gathered their weapons, "and practice what I've shown you." As the men dispersed, Sarah sensed a presence on the roof of the general store across the alley. Looking up, she caught a glimpse of Harrison watching the training session, his expression unreadable in the shadow of his hat. He made no attempt to hide, merely nodded slightly when their eyes met, then disappeared from view. The message was clear: he was watching, biding his time. Sarah returned to her shop, unsurprised to find Sullivan waiting for her. "You seem to know a lot about guns for a gunsmith's widow," he said without preamble. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow. "Thomas taught me. He believed a woman should know how to defend herself." "Uh-huh." Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the tactical training, that from Thomas too, his time in the army." The sheriff nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, whatever you learned, I'm grateful you're sharing it now." He paused. "There's something you should know. I sent a rider to Sanderson's ranch this morning, asked him to bring in anyone who can shoot. That'll give us another 6 men. 12 defenders against 7 professional killers," Sarah mused. "Still not good odds. Better than 5 against 7. Sullivan adjusted his gun belt. "I've been thinking about your suggestion, making them come to us rather than trying to defend the whole town. And I think you're right. We concentrate our defense around the key buildings. The bank, my office, maybe your shop since it has all the weapons." Sarah considered this. "They'll expect us to defend the bank. We could use that, make them think that's where we're concentrated, then hit them from positions they aren't watching." A small smile crossed Sullivan's face. "I knew there was a reason I came to you for advice." After he left, Sarah stood in her shop, staring at the Colt Navy in its shadow box. The sheriff was no fool. He suspected there was more to her than she let on. How much he knew or guessed was unclear, but his trust seemed genuine. Whether that trust would survive the revelation of her true identity remained to be seen. As dusk approached, Sarah made her final preparations. She loaded the Colt Navy and strapped it to her hip beneath her long coat. A Winchester rifle and a shotgun were positioned strategically in the shop, loaded and ready. From beneath a false panel in the floorboards, she retrieved extra ammunition and a second revolver, tucking it into her waistband at the small of her back. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. Sarah drew the Colt smoothly before calling, "Who is it?" "Elizabeth Palmer," came the reply. Sarah holstered the gun and opened the door to find the doctor standing on her porch, medical bag in hand. "I thought you might need these," Palmer said, entering and placing the bag on the counter. "Bandages, laudanum, surgical tools, just in case." Sarah eyed the bag grimly. "Let's hope we don't need them. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst." Palmer's expression was solemn. "I've set up a treatment area in my clinic. Andrew's helping me stockpile supplies." "How is he?" "Terrified," Palmer admitted, "but determined not to show it." She hesitated. "He's insisting on standing watch with Reverend McCall at the church." Sarah frowned. "He's not a fighter, Elizabeth." "No, but he's a good man. He wants to protect what he loves." Palmer's eyes drifted to the Colt Navy visible beneath Sarah's coat. "It seems we all do in our own ways." A moment of understanding passed between the women. Whether Palmer had guessed Sarah's secret or simply accepted that her friend had hidden depths, she wasn't judging. "Be careful, Sarah," Palmer said as she turned to leave. "This town needs you." After Palmer departed, Sarah watched the sun setting from her shop window, casting long shadows down Main Street. Falcon's Edge had transformed in just 2 days. Windows were boarded up, barricades erected at key intersections, impromptu watchtowers established on several rooftops. Would it be enough? Sarah doubted it. The Ravenclaw gang had numbers, experience, and ruthlessness on their side. The best the town could hope for was to make taking Falcon's Edge too costly for Blackwood to bother. A movement across the street caught her eye. Harrison emerging from the hotel, his dark suit replaced by more practical clothing. He carried a rifle openly now, no longer pretending to be a harmless investor. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and Sarah saw something unexpected in his expression. Not hatred or vengeance, but a grim sort of recognition. One predator acknowledging another. Perhaps Sarah thought Harrison and she shared more than just a moment from the past. Perhaps they understood each other better than either would care to admit. Night fell over Falcon's Edge, bringing a tense silence with it. Sarah extinguished the lamps in her shop, moving to the small balcony on the second floor that offered a clear view of the western approach. Main Street lay quiet below the defenders, hidden in their positions, waiting. The distant sound of hoofbeats broke the silence. Not the Ravenclaw gang yet, but Sullivan returning from placing lookouts along the approaches to town. The sheriff dismounted before his office, tying his horse to the hitching post with deliberate calm. Sarah descended to meet him, stepping out of the shadows as he approached her shop. "Riders spotted to the north," Sullivan reported quietly. "Still distant, but definitely heading this way. Cooper counted 10 men, not 7. Sarah's expression darkened. "They've picked up new blood since Cisco Junction." Sullivan nodded grimly. "We'll stick to the plan. Concentrate our defense, make them come to us." He glanced at the Colt Navy on her hip. "You ready for this?" Sarah checked the revolver one final time. "I've been ready for 16 years, Ethan. I just didn't know it." As the sheriff moved on to check other defensive positions, Sarah felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Harrison standing in the shadows of her porch. 10 against 12, he said quietly. "Not good odds for your friends." Sarah regarded him steadily. "Why are you still here, Mr. Smith? Or should I call you Maxwell Harrison?" If he was surprised she knew his real name, he didn't show it. "You've known all along. Since the moment I saw you," Sarah confirmed. "You have your father's eyes." Harrison's jaw tightened. "And you're Catherine Holloway, the ghost, the woman who murdered my father." "I executed a corrupt judge who sold verdicts to the highest bidder," Sarah corrected. "The Rangers sanctioned it." "A lie," Harrison hissed. "My father was a good man." Sarah shook her head. "We both know that's not true. But we don't have time for this now. The Ravenclaw gang is coming, and they don't care about your vendetta." "You think this changes anything?" Harrison's hand moved subtly toward his concealed weapon. "Once they're dealt with, you're still mine." "If we survive," Sarah replied, stepping past him. "That's a mighty big if, Mr. Harrison." As she moved away, Harrison called after her. "Why did you do it, Holloway, in front of a child?" "His son." Sarah paused, not turning around. "I didn't know you'd be there. Your father wasn't supposed to be home yet." She glanced back over her shoulder. "For what it's worth, I've regretted that you saw it every day since." Before Harrison could respond, 3 rapid shots echoed from the western edge of town. The warning signal. The Ravenclaw gang had arrived. Sarah drew the Colt Navy. "Make your choice, Harrison. Help us or stay out of the way. But if you try to take me now, neither of us will live to see morning." With that, she disappeared into the darkness, positioning herself for the coming battle. The ghost was fully awake now, and Falcon's Edge would witness what happened when a legend came to life. The warning shots echoed through the night, sending Falcon's Edge into immediate action. Lanterns were extinguished, shutters closed with muffled thumps, defenders moving silently to their assigned positions. Sarah crouched behind a water trough, the Colt Navy steady in her grip as she scanned the darkness. A flurry of gunfire erupted from the western edge. Sharp cracks of rifle fire followed by the deeper boom of a shotgun. Then silence fell again, heavy and ominous. Sheriff Sullivan materialized from the shadows, moving in a crouch toward her position. "They hit the west barricade," he reported in a hushed voice. "Cooper and the Sloanes drove them back, but Jim took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc's with him now." "Scouts," Sarah muttered. "Testing our defenses?" Sullivan nodded. "They'll be back with the whole gang next time." "Where do you want me?" The sheriff considered. "Bank's the obvious target. If you position yourself in the alley behind Miller's store, you'll have a clear shot at anyone approaching the front." Sarah nodded. "And Harrison?" "Smith." Sullivan frowned. "What about him?" She realized her mistake too late. "I saw him with a rifle earlier. Thought he might be helping." "Haven't seen him," Sullivan replied, his expression suspicious. "Sarah, what aren't you telling me?" Before she could answer, gunshots erupted again, this time from the eastern approach. The Ravenclaw gang was probing from multiple directions, looking for weaknesses. "Go," Sullivan ordered, drawing his revolver. "I'll check the east side." Sarah moved through the darkness toward her position, keeping to the shadows, using the buildings for cover. Years of training reasserted themselves. Move silently, stay low, watch the sight lines. The ghost had spent years tracking targets through hostile territory during and after the war skills that came flooding back now, as if she'd never stopped using them. As she reached the alley behind Miller's store, Sarah caught movement on the roof of the building opposite, a shadowy figure positioning a rifle. Friend or foe, she couldn't tell in the darkness. "Sullivan, send you," she whispered harshly. The figure paused. No, came the quiet reply. Maxwell Harrison's voice. Sarah kept her Colt trained on him. Which side are you on, Harrison? Not theirs. He adjusted his position, the rifle barrel now pointing away from her. I've spent 16 years hunting you, Holloway. I'm not about to let some outlaw rob me of that satisfaction. A peculiar alliance, then. The executioner and her victim's son united temporarily against a common enemy. Sarah would take it for now. Bank's the likely target, she said. Watch the street. I'll cover the alley. Harrison's silhouette nodded once before disappearing from view. Minutes stretched into an hour as Falcon's Edge waited in tense silence. Occasional gunfire echoed from the town's perimeter as the Ravenclaw gang continued testing defenses, but the main force held back. Sarah remained motionless in her hiding spot, the Colt Navy a reassuring weight in her hand. Then approaching hoofbeats, not from the west or east but from the north. The gang had found another way encircling around the defensive positions. Sarah abandoned her post, moving swiftly through back alleys toward the sound. She emerged onto Main Street in time to see riders entering the town square, their silhouettes dark against the night sky. At their head rode a man whose very posture exuded confidence and menace, Victor Blackwood himself. Beside him, his brother Luke was recognizable by the distinctive slouch hat he wore, a trophy taken from a Union officer he'd killed during the war. Spread out, Blackwood ordered, his deep voice carrying in the night air. Find the bank. Kill anyone who resists. The riders dismounted, breaking into smaller groups as they moved through the town. Sarah pressed herself into a doorway as two men passed, their revolvers, drawn eyes scanning the shadows. Ain't much resistance, one muttered. Thought Cooper said they was ready for us. Don't get cocky, the other replied. Feels too quiet. As they passed, Sarah slipped from her hiding place, following silently. The men headed toward the bank, exactly as Sullivan had predicted. But something felt wrong. Blackwood was too smart to send men walking into an obvious trap. A flicker of movement from the roof of the general store caught her eye. Harrison adjusting his position. The men below spotted it too, one raising his revolver to fire upward. Sarah's Colt cleared leather with fluid precision, the hammer cocking and firing in one smooth motion. The would-be shooter collapsed with a bullet in his back before he could get a shot off. The second man whirled, firing wildly in her direction. Sarah dropped to one knee, squeezing the trigger twice more. Both shots found their mark, and the man fell face down in the dirt. Instantly, the night erupted with gunfire. The element of surprise lost both sides, abandoned stealth for firepower. Bullets whizzed through the air, splintering wood and shattering glass. Sarah darted from her position to the cover of a water trough, reloading the Colt with practiced efficiency. From her new vantage point, she could see the main body of the Ravenclaw gang converging on the bank, using their horses as mobile cover. Blackwood directed the assault with hand signals, keeping himself protected behind his men. Sullivan and the town defenders responded with disciplined fire, picking their shots carefully as Sarah had taught them. Two of Blackwood's men went down in the first exchange, but the gang's superior numbers began to tell as they pushed forward. Sarah, Sullivan's voice called from somewhere to her right. They're flanking around the church. She scanned the battlefield, spotting three riders breaking off from the main group, circling around toward the undefended side of town. If they got behind the defenders' positions, the whole defense would collapse. Sarah sprinted across an open space, bullets kicking up dust at her heels, and ducked into the shadow of the church. She moved rapidly around the building, emerging on the far side just as the riders approached. The night exploded in muzzle flashes as Sarah fired, downing the lead rider with her first shot. The second managed to return fire, his bullet grazing her arm in a line of fire. Sarah ignored the pain, dropping him with two quick shots. The third rider wheeled his horse, attempting to escape. Sarah took careful aim, led the target, and squeezed the trigger. The man toppled from his saddle, his horse galloping away, riderless into the night. Blood trickled down Sarah's arm from the wound, but she hardly noticed. The ghost was fully in control now, 16 years of suppressed instincts surging to the surface. She reloaded the Colt Navy, each motion automatic, ingrained by thousands of repetitions. 3 down, but the main threat remained. Sarah made her way back toward the center of town, staying in the shadows, using the buildings for cover. The battle had concentrated around the bank, with Sullivan and the town defenders pinned down by Blackwood's superior firepower. Time to end this, she heard Blackwood shout. Bring out the dynamite, Luke, dynamite. If they blew the bank vault, the explosion could take out half the town. Sarah needed to act fast. She spotted Luke Blackwood retrieving something from his saddlebags, the telltale shape of dynamite sticks bundled together. As he prepared to light the fuse, Sarah stepped into the open, the Colt Navy leveled at his chest. "Drop it, Blackwood," she commanded, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. Luke froze, his eyes widening as he took in the woman before him. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who can put a bullet through your eye at this distance," Sarah replied evenly. "Drop the dynamite, now." For a moment it seemed Luke might comply. Then gunfire erupted from her left, one of Blackwood's men firing from a second-story window. Sarah ducked returning fire, but the distraction was enough for Luke to dart behind a horse trough, the dynamite still in his possession. "Kill her!" Victor Blackwood bellowed, emerging from cover with a shotgun raised. Sarah dove behind a wagon as buckshot tore through the space she'd occupied a split second earlier. She found herself pinned down, bullets splintering the wood around her. The Ravenclaw gang had her position zeroed. It was only a matter of time before one of those shots found its mark. A rifle cracked from the rooftop above, and one of Blackwood's men pitched forward. Another shot another man down, Harrison providing covering fire from his elevated position. Sarah used the momentary distraction to break from cover, sprinting toward the smithy. Bullets kicked up dust around her feet, but she made it to the shelter of her shop, crashing through the door and rolling behind the counter. Through the window, she could see Luke Blackwood moving toward the bank, with the dynamite using the chaos as cover. She raised the Colt to fire, but a movement at the back of her shop made her spin around, bringing the gun to bear on a new threat. Maxwell Harrison stood in the doorway to her workshop, his rifle aimed at her. For a long moment they remained frozen in a standoff, each with a clear shot at the other. 16 years, Harrison said quietly, his finger on the trigger. 16 years, I've waited for this moment. The Blackwoods are about to blow up half the town, Sarah replied, the Colt Navy unwaveringly pointed at his chest. Including us if we don't stop them. Harrison's expression remained impassive. Why should I care about this town? Because innocent people will die. Sarah's eyes locked with his. Just like the innocent people your father sentenced to hang. Is that what you want to be like him? Something flickered in Harrison's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition. Before he could respond, the back window exploded inward as a bullet shattered the glass. Both Sarah and Harrison ducked instinctively. "Thought I saw someone duck in here," came Luke Blackwood's voice from outside. "Come on out, lady, or we start shooting up the place until you do." Sarah and Harrison exchanged glances, their private vendetta momentarily superseded by the immediate threat. Without words, an understanding passed between them. The past would wait. Survival came first. Harrison moved to the side of the window, peering cautiously around the frame. 3 men, he reported in a whisper. Luke and 2 others. They've got the dynamite. "Back door?" Sarah asked. "Probably watched." Sarah's mind raced, assessing options. "The workshop. There's a trap door to the cellar. We can use the old tunnel that runs to the livery stable." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Escape route." "Insurance," Sarah replied. "When you spend your life looking over your shoulder, you learn to prepare." Another bullet crashed through the window, followed by Luke's voice. "Last chance before we light this place up." Sarah led Harrison through the workshop to a heavy workbench. Together they shifted it, revealing a trap door hidden beneath. As they pulled it open, the front door of the smithy splintered under the impact of a boot. "Down!" Sarah hissed, shoving Harrison toward the opening. "I'll follow." Harrison disappeared into the darkness below. Sarah was about to follow when Luke Blackwood and his men burst into the workshop, guns drawn. "Well, well," Luke drawled, taking in the scene. The ghost herself trying to disappear down a hole. Sarah froze, the Colt Navy half raised. "How did he know that name?" Luke smiled coldly, reading her surprise. "Oh, yes, we know exactly who you are, Catherine Holloway. You're worth quite a bounty in certain circles." Understanding dawned. Harrison hadn't just tracked her down by chance. He'd been working with the Ravenclaw gang, using them to flush her out. The timing had been too perfect to be coincidence. "Your partner already told us everything." Luke continued, confirming her suspicions. "How you've been hiding here for years, playing at being a simple gunsmith. He was supposed to identify you, then we'd split the bounty." Sarah felt a cold fury rising within her. All the training with the town, watched the defensive preparations. Harrison had been feeding information to the Blackwoods the entire time. No wonder they'd known exactly how to circumvent the town's defenses. "Where is he now?" she asked, stalling for time, her mind calculating angles and distances. Luke shrugged. "Probably halfway to Mexico with his share. Smart man cutting out before things got messy." A lie. Harrison had been on the roof providing covering fire just minutes ago. Whatever game he was playing, he hadn't abandoned his hunt for her yet. "Now," Luke said, raising his revolver, "I'm afraid our arrangement doesn't include taking you alive." Sarah tensed, preparing to dive for cover, knowing her chances of surviving 3 armed men at this range were slim to none. Then the floor beneath Luke erupted as the trapdoor flew upward, catching him under the chin with bone-crushing force. Harrison surged up through the opening, firing his revolver point-blank into one of Luke's companions. The third man turned to fire, but Sarah was already moving the Colt Navy, clearing leather and barking once, twice. The man staggered backwards, his unfired gun falling from nerveless fingers. Luke Blackwood lay unconscious, blood streaming from his shattered jaw. His companion was dead, a bullet through his heart. The third man slumped against the wall, life fading from his eyes as he clutched the wounds in his chest. Harrison stood over Luke's prone form, his revolver aimed at the outlaw's head. "He was lying," he said without looking at Sarah. "I wasn't working with them." "I know," Sarah replied, keeping her own weapon ready. "You wouldn't have come back up if you were." "He knew your real name." Sarah nodded grimly. "Someone told them. If not you, then who?" Before Harrison could respond, an explosion rocked the town, not from the bank but from the direction of the church. Through the shattered window, Sarah could see flames rising into the night sky. "They're burning the town," she realized. "Victor's cutting his losses." Harrison grabbed the unconscious Luke under the arms. "We need him alive. He can tell us who sold you out." Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding agreement. Together they dragged Luke toward the trap door. As they maneuvered him down into the cellar, more explosions shook the town. The Ravenclaw gang was detonating charges, creating chaos to cover their retreat. The tunnel beneath the smithy was low and narrow, forcing them to hunch as they dragged Luke's limp form between them. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old timber. Sarah led the way, navigating the darkness with the familiarity of someone who had traversed this path many times, in preparation for a day she'd hoped would never come. "How long have you known about me?" she asked as they moved through the darkness. Harrison's voice came from behind her, strained with the effort of dragging Luke. "About a year. Took me 15 years to pick up your trail after you disappeared. Then rumors of a woman gunsmith with an uncanny aim led me here. And you just waited. Why not take me immediately?" "I wanted to be certain," Harrison replied. "And I wanted to understand who you'd become. The ghost who killed my father, or Sarah Morgan, the widow who teaches children to read on Sundays." The observation surprised her. She hadn't realized Harrison had been watching her that closely. "Both," she said after a moment. "I'm both." They emerged into the livery stable, the sounds of gunfire and shouting muffled by distance. Harrison secured Luke against a post, binding his hands with a length of rope. "He'll live," Sarah assessed, examining the outlaw's bloodied face. "Jaw's broken, but nothing fatal." "Good." Harrison checked his revolver, reloading spent chambers. "We need to get back out there. Your sheriff friend is probably thinking you're dead." Sarah studied Harrison in the dim light filtering through the stable windows. "Why are you helping me? You've wanted me dead for 16 years. Harrison met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I want justice for my father, but that's between you and me. These men, the Ravenclaw gang, they're just killers. They don't care who gets hurt. And you do." Something flickered in his eyes. "I'm not my father, Mrs. Morgan. I don't condemn the innocent to save the guilty." Before Sarah could respond, Luke began to stir, moaning through his shattered jaw. Harrison knelt beside him. "Who told you about Catherine Holloway?" he demanded. "Who sold her out?" Luke's eyes flickered open, pain and hatred burning in their depths. He made a garbled sound, his broken jaw preventing clear speech. "Write it," Sarah said, producing a pencil and scrap of paper from a workbench. "Write the name." Luke glared at her, but took the pencil with bound hands. He scrawled a single word on the paper, then thrust it toward them with a malicious gleam in his eyes. Harrison took the paper, his expression darkening as he read the name. Wordlessly, he passed it to Sarah. The name written there hit her like a physical blow. Sullivan. No, she whispered. That's impossible. Ethan's been here for 20 years. He's the sheriff. Luke made a sound that might have been laughter, then scrawled another note, paid to find you. $500. Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Ethan Sullivan, the man who'd welcomed her family to Falcon's Edge, who'd helped bury her daughter, who'd stood beside her at Robert's funeral. All this time had he been waiting for the right moment to collect the bounty on her head. It could be a lie, Harrison said, studying her reaction, trying to turn us against each other. Sarah's mind raced, reassessing every interaction with Sullivan over the past 12 years. The little comments, the suspicious glances, the way he'd never quite believed her explanations about her shooting skills. Had he been playing her all along, waiting for confirmation of her identity before making his move? There's only one way to find out, she said grimly, checking her Colt Navy. We need to find Sullivan. Harrison nodded, drawing his own weapon. And if it's true, if he betrayed you, Sarah's expression hardened, then he'll learn why they called me the ghost. Kifi. They left Luke secured in the stable, gagged, to prevent him calling for help. As they stepped outside, the full extent of the chaos became apparent. Much of Main Street was ablaze, buildings that had stood for decades now engulfed in flames. Gunfire still echoed sporadically, but the main body of the Ravenclaw gang appeared to be withdrawing, their objectives of destruction accomplished. Sarah and Harrison made their way through back alleys, avoiding the worst of the fighting. They hadn't gone far when they encountered Dr. Palmer tending to a wounded man in a doorway. Sarah, Palmer exclaimed, her face streaked with soot and tears. Thank God, we thought you were dead when the smithy caught fire. Elizabeth, where's Sullivan? Sarah asked urgently. Last I saw, he was headed toward the church. Palmer replied, her hands never stopping their work on the wounded man's leg. They've taken hostages there. Reverend McCall, Martha McCreary, several others. Sarah exchanged glances with Harrison. If Sullivan had betrayed her, why would he be trying to save hostages? How many hostages? Harrison asked. 5 or 6, Palmer said. Victor Blackwood is threatening to burn the church with them inside, unless the town surrenders all its valuables by dawn. Sarah's jaw tightened. We're not going to let that happen. As they turned to leave, Palmer called after them. Sarah, Andrew's in there too. Please, if you can. Chopri. Sarah nodded once, understanding the unspoken plea. We'll get him out, Elizabeth, I promise. They moved through the burning town toward the church, staying to the shadows, avoiding Ravenclaw men, still looting buildings along the way. As they approached, the situation became clear. The church itself wasn't burning, but Blackwood had set fires around it, creating a ring of flame that made approach difficult. From their vantage point behind a water trough, Sarah could see Victor Blackwood on the church steps, shotgun in hand, directing his remaining men. Inside, through the windows, hostages were visible, bound to the pews. There was no sign of Sullivan. I count 5 men plus Blackwood, Harrison whispered. Too many to rush. We need a distraction, Sarah agreed. Harrison nodded toward a nearby building that had so far escaped the flames. Livery office. If we set it alight, it might draw some of them off. No more fires, Sarah countered. There's ammunition stored in that building. If it catches, the explosion could kill half the street. Then what do you suggest? Sarah scanned the area, her mind working through possibilities. Then she spotted it. The water tower at the far end of the street, its wooden supports partially charred, but still standing. The tower, she said. A few well-placed shots and it comes down. Water douses some fires, creates confusion. Harrison studied the structure. Can you make that shot? It's got to be 100 yards at night with all this smoke. Sarah checked the Colt Navy. This old gun's never failed to kill with one shot. Bringing down a water tower should be well within its capabilities. I'll create a diversion on the south side, Harrison offered. Draw some attention away from you. Sarah nodded agreement. On my signal, then. They separated, Harrison disappearing into the smoke toward the south side of the church. Sarah working her way toward a position with a clear line of fire to the water tower. She found it behind an overturned wagon, the tower's silhouette visible against the firelit sky. Taking careful aim with the Colt, Sarah controlled her breathing, focusing on the southeastern support beam. It would need to be a precise shot. Too high and the tower might not fall. Too low and it might collapse in the wrong direction. In the distance, she heard Harrison begin his diversion. Shots fired into the air, followed by shouts. Two of Blackwood's men left the church perimeter to investigate exactly as planned. Sarah exhaled slowly, squeezing the trigger. The Colt Navy bucked in her hand, the bullet striking the support beam exactly where intended. She fired again, twice more each shot, weakening the structure further. On the fourth shot, the beam splintered with a crack audible even over the chaos of the burning town. The water tower groaned, tilting precariously as its support gave way. With a tremendous crash, it collapsed, sending a wall of water rushing down the street. The flood extinguished smaller fires in its path and created instant chaos among Blackwood's men. Sarah was already moving, using the confusion to approach the church from the north side. Through the windows, she could see the hostages reacting to the commotion outside, struggling against their bonds. Andrew Palmer was among them, his scholarly face bruised but determined. She had nearly reached the church when a figure emerged from the shadows beside her. Not Harrison, but Sheriff Ethan Sullivan. His face was streaked with soot, a bloody gash across his forehead, but his gun was steady in his hand. "Sarah," he said, relief evident in his voice. "You're alive." Sarah kept the Colt Navy pointed at his chest. "That's far enough, Ethan." Sullivan froze, confusion replacing relief. "What are you doing?" "Luke Blackwood wrote your name," Sarah said coldly. "Said you sold me out, that you've known who I was all along." Understanding dawned in Sullivan's eyes. He wasn't lying. The confirmation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Despite the evidence, part of her had hoped there was another explanation. 16 years, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I trusted you. My husband trusted you. My daughter. I've known who you were from the day you arrived." Sullivan interrupted. "Catherine Holloway, the ghost. I recognized you from the wanted posters. And you've just been waiting all this time for what, the right price?" Sullivan shook his head. "For the right moment, to tell you the truth." He reached slowly into his vest pocket, removing a folded piece of paper. "This came for you 6 years ago. I never delivered it." Sarah kept the Colt trained on him as she took the paper with her free hand. Unfolding it one-handed, she read the official letterhead, "Office of the Territorial Governor." It was a pardon, full and complete, for the death of Judge Samuel Harrison, citing evidence of judicial corruption in service to the Rangers. Dated 10 years after the shooting. "Why?" she demanded, the paper trembling in her hand. "Why keep this from me?" "Because the moment you knew you were free, you might leave," Sullivan admitted. "And this town needs you, Sarah. I needed you." The raw honesty in his voice made her hesitate. "You weren't collecting the bounty. There is no bounty anymore. Not since that pardon." "Then how did the Blackwoods know about me?" Sullivan's expression darkened. "Because I got drunk 3 months ago in Tucson. Started talking about the famous ghost living peaceful in my town. Word travels fast when it comes to legends." Sarah stared at him, trying to reconcile the betrayal with the shame evident in his face. "You told them where to find me. Because of your loose tongue, this town is burning." "I know," Sullivan said quietly. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." He nodded toward the church. "Starting with those people in there." Sarah lowered the Colt Navy slightly. "What's your plan?" "Victor thinks I'm fetching the bank money," Sullivan explained. "When I go back in, he'll be expecting me to have it. That's our chance to get the drop on him. He'll kill you the moment you enter without the money." "Not if someone's providing a distraction?" Sullivan's eyes met hers. "Not if the ghost has his back." Sarah considered the sheriff, the man who'd kept her secret for 12 years, who'd hidden her pardon for selfish reasons, but was now willing to risk his life to save the town he'd endangered. It wasn't simple, this mix of betrayal and loyalty. Nothing ever was. "All right," she decided, "but we do this my way." As they formulated a plan, Harrison appeared from the shadows, his rifle at the ready. He took in the scene with a glance. Sarah and Sullivan talking, the Colt Navy lowered but not holstered. "I take it explanations were made," he said dryly. Sarah handed him the pardon. "According to this, I was officially forgiven 10 years ago." Harrison read the document, his expression unreadable. "My father's crimes acknowledged by the governor himself. All this time hunting a woman who'd been legally exonerated." "Life has a peculiar sense of humor," Sarah observed. "Though I suspect neither of us finds it particularly amusing." Harrison finished handing back the pardon. What now? Sarah outlined the plan. Sullivan would return to the church ostensibly with news about the money. While Victor was distracted, Sarah would enter through the back window and Harrison would provide covering fire from the bell tower of the adjacent building. "And the hostages?" Harrison asked. "Get them down on the floor at the first shot," Sullivan said. "Most of Blackwood's men are out chasing shadows. There might only be Victor and one other inside." As they prepared to move into position, Sarah caught Harrison's arm. "Why are you still helping? You know the truth now. Your father was corrupt. My actions were sanctioned." Harrison's face was shadowed in the firelight. 16 years of hatred doesn't disappear with a piece of paper, Mrs. Morgan. But I'm beginning to think I've been chasing the wrong ghost. With that cryptic statement, he disappeared into the darkness, moving toward his position in the bell tower. Sarah watched him go, uncertain whether he meant he should have been hunting his father's true nature, rather than her or something else entirely. Sullivan checked his revolver one final time. "Ready." Sarah nodded, the Colt Navy comfortable in her grip. "Just like old times, Ethan. Only this time, I'm the one watching your back." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Sullivan replied with a grim smile. "See you on the other side, Ghost." As he walked openly toward the church front doors, Sarah circled around to the back, finding the window they'd identified. Through it, she could see Victor Blackwood pacing before the altar, his shotgun cradled in his arms. 5 hostages were bound to pews. Reverend McCall, Martha McCreary, Andrew Palmer, and 2 ranchers she recognized from the edge of town. A single guard stood watch inside, his attention focused on the hostages. Sarah waited, counting silently, giving Sullivan time to reach the front doors. When she judged the moment right, she used the butt of her revolver to break the window glass, then vaulted through the opening in a shower of shards. The guard whirled at the sound, but Sarah was already firing her first shot, taking him in the chest. He collapsed without a cry. Victor Blackwood turned, bringing up his shotgun, but Sullivan crashed through the front doors at that exact moment, drawing Blackwood's attention. For the crucial second, Sarah needed to duck behind a pew. "Where's my money, Sheriff?" Blackwood demanded. "Coming," Sullivan replied, hands raised placatingly. "Just need a little more time." "Time's up," Blackwood snarled, swinging the shotgun toward him. A rifle shot cracked from somewhere above. Harrison firing through the church's upper window. The bullet splintered the wood of the pulpit inches from Blackwood's head, causing him to flinch and fire the shotgun prematurely. The blast went wide, destroying a stained glass window in a shower of colored shards. Sarah rose from cover, the Colt Navy leveled. "Drop it, Blackwood. It's over." Victor Blackwood's face contorted with rage as he found himself suddenly outflanked. "The famous ghost," he sneered. "Not so ghostly with half my men hunting you." "Your men are scattered," Sullivan countered, drawing his revolver. "Most are already fleeing town. It's just you now." Blackwood's eyes darted from Sullivan to Sarah, calculating. "You think I came this far to surrender to a woman and a drunk sheriff?" With surprising speed, he leveled the shotgun at the hostages. "One moves, they all die." Sarah and Sullivan froze, caught in the standoff. From his position in the bell tower, Harrison would have no clear shot without endangering the hostages. "Let them go, Victor," Sarah said evenly. "Take me instead. I'm worth more to you alive than they are dead." Sullivan shot her a warning glance, but she ignored it. "The bounty on the ghost would set you up nicely," she continued. "More than what you get robbing this town." Blackwood's eyes narrowed with interest. "You'd sacrifice yourself for these people, why?" "Because that's who she is," came a new voice from the church entrance. All eyes turned to see Maxwell Harrison standing in the doorway, his rifle aimed at Blackwood. "She's not just the ghost anymore. She's Sarah Morgan of Falcon's Edge, and she's under my protection." Blackwood laughed incredulously. "Under your protection? Who the hell are you to—" "The son of Judge Samuel Harrison," Harrison stated flatly. "The man she killed 16 years ago. If anyone has a claim on her life, it's me. And I'm telling you now, you can't have her." The declaration hung in the air like gunsmoke. Sarah stared at Harrison, unable to fully process this unexpected defense from the man who had hunted her for more than half her adult life. Victor Blackwood's moment of confusion was brief but crucial. In that instant of distraction, Andrew Palmer, the scholarly husband of the town doctor, threw himself sideways from his pew, knocking into Blackwood's legs. The outlaw stumbled his shotgun, discharging into the ceiling. Sarah and Sullivan fired simultaneously, their bullets striking Blackwood in the chest and shoulder. He staggered backward, crashing into the altar, blood blossoming across his shirt. His shotgun clattered to the floor as he slid down, leaving a crimson smear on the white altar cloth. "Luke!" he gasped, his eyes already glazing. "My brother is alive," Sarah told him, approaching cautiously with her Colt still trained on him. "More than you deserve." Victor Blackwood's final breath rattled in his chest, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. The feared leader of the Ravenclaw gang died as he had lived, violently on the wrong side of the law. Sullivan moved quickly to free the hostages, starting with Andrew Palmer. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen a scholar do," he told the doctor's husband. "Elizabeth would never forgive me if I didn't try," Palmer replied, rubbing his chafed wrists. As the freed hostages hurried from the church, Sarah turned to Harrison, who still stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the shadowed light. "Under your protection," she asked quietly. Harrison lowered his rifle. It seemed the right thing to say at the time. "Did you mean it?" Before he could answer, shouts from outside drew their attention. Through the open doors, they could see the remaining Ravenclaw men fleeing town, pursued by the citizens of Falcon's Edge. The tide had turned. "We should help them," Sullivan said, checking his ammunition. Sarah nodded, but her eyes remained on Harrison. "This isn't over between us," she told him. "No," Harrison agreed, "but perhaps it's changing." With that enigmatic statement, he turned and hurried outside to join the pursuit. Sarah watched him go, the Colt Navy heavy in her hand, wondering if 16 years of hatred could truly be set aside in a single night. Sullivan appeared at her side. "You know, for a ghost, you're remarkably substantial," he said with a hint of his old humor. "And for a friend, you're remarkably duplicitous," she replied, though there was less bite in her words than she'd intended. The sheriff nodded, accepting the rebuke. "I deserved that, and probably more." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "You do. And after this is over, we'll discuss exactly how you're going to make it right." She gestured toward the door. "But first we have a town to save." Together they stepped out into the chaos of Falcon's Edge, where fire and gun smoke painted the night sky orange and black. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time since the warning shots had sounded, Sarah felt something like hope. The ghost and the sheriff side by side again, this time with the truth between them. Dawn broke over Falcon's Edge, painting the smoking ruins of Main Street in shades of amber and gold. The night's destruction was fully visible in the harsh morning light. Buildings reduced to charred frames, bullet holes peppering surviving walls, blood staining the hard-packed dirt. Sarah Morgan sat on the steps of the church, the Colt Navy resting across her knees. She'd been up all night helping organize bucket brigades, treating the wounded alongside Dr. Palmer, and tracking down the last of the scattered Ravenclaw gang. Exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand, but she refused to yield to it just yet. Sheriff Sullivan approached, his face haggard beneath a layer of soot. He handed her a steaming cup of coffee without a word, then lowered himself beside her with a groan that spoke of aging bones and fresh bruises. "Final count," he said after a moment. 3 townspeople dead, 7 wounded, none critical. 9 of Blackwood's men dead, 4 captured, including Luke. Sarah nodded, sipping the bitter coffee. "Could have been worse." "Much worse," Sullivan agreed. "Thanks to you." She shot him a sidelong glance. "Don't think this makes us square, Ethan." "I know it doesn't," he replied quietly. "Keeping that pardon from you was wrong. I told myself it was for the good of the town, but really it was selfish. I was afraid you'd leave." "I might have," Sarah admitted. 6 years ago when the wounds were fresher. But not now. This is my home." They sat in silence, watching the townsfolk beginning the work of clearing debris and salvaging what could be saved. Among them was Maxwell Harrison, helping Daniel Cooper shore up a damaged wall. Throughout the night, he'd worked alongside the defenders, tracking down fleeing outlaws, treating the wounded fighting fires, behaving in every way like a man invested in saving the town, not destroying it. "What are you going to do about him?" Sullivan asked, following her gaze. Sarah watched Harrison lift a heavy beam, his movements efficient and controlled. "I don't know. 16 years is a long time to hate someone. I'm not sure he knows how to stop. Looks to me like he's trying to figure it out. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Palmer hurried up to them, her medical bag clutched in one hand. "Luke Blackwood's awake," she reported, "and demanding to speak with you, Sarah. Says he has information you need to hear." Sarah exchanged glances with Sullivan. "About what?" "He wouldn't say," Palmer replied. "Just that it concerns Harrison." Sarah stood checking the Colt Navy's chambers out of habit. "Where is he?" "My clinic. Andrew's watching him." As Sarah moved to follow the doctor, Sullivan caught her arm. "Be careful. Luke's as treacherous as his brother, just smarter about it." Sarah nodded acknowledgement before following Palmer across the devastated town square. The doctor's clinic had survived the night largely intact, protected by its stone construction and position away from the main thoroughfare. Inside, Andrew Palmer sat vigilantly beside a cot where Luke Blackwood lay secured with ropes. The outlaw's jaw was bandaged, his face swollen and bruised, but his eyes burned with malevolent intelligence. When he saw Sarah enter, a spark of something like satisfaction glinted in their depths. "Leave us," Sarah instructed the Palmers. Dr. Palmer hesitated. His jaw's wired, he can't speak clearly, but he can write. She indicated a slate and chalk on the bedside table. "Call if you need anything." When they were alone, Sarah drew up a chair, positioning herself just out of Luke's reach. "I'm told you have information," she said without preamble. Luke regarded her for a moment, then reached for the slate. His handwriting was jagged but legible. "Harrison is not who he claims." "I know exactly who he is," Sarah replied. "Maxwell Harrison, son of Judge Samuel Harrison, the boy who watched me kill his father." Luke shook his head painfully, writing again, "Not Harrison's son." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean, hired gun, Pinkerton man, hunting you for client, not revenge?" The claim hit Sarah like a bucket of cold water. "You're lying." "Check his things. Proof in saddlebags." Sarah studied Luke's face, trying to discern truth from deception. The outlaw met her gaze steadily, a certain smugness in his expression, despite his injuries. "Why tell me this?" she asked. Luke scrawled one more message. "Rather you kill him than hang me." Sarah left the clinic, her mind racing. Could it be true? Was Harrison not seeking personal vengeance but working as a hired gun all along? It would explain his sudden willingness to aid the town. If his client wanted her alive rather than dead, protecting her would be part of his job. But something about the timing felt wrong. If Harrison was truly a Pinkerton agent, why wait 16 years to find her? And why the elaborate charade about being the judge's son? She found Sullivan organizing repairs on the bank building. "I need to find Harrison's thing," she told him. "Where's he staying?" "Room 3 at Martha's Hotel," Sullivan replied, noting her expression. "What's happened?" "Luke claims Harrison isn't who he says he is, that he's a Pinkerton man hunting me for a client, not for personal revenge." Sullivan's brow furrowed. "Could be trying to turn us against each other. Sow discord." "That's what I thought, but it's an oddly specific lie if that's what it is." "Want me to come with you?" Sarah shook her head. "No. Keep an eye on Luke. Make sure he doesn't try anything." The hotel had suffered only minor damage during the attack, mainly broken windows and bullet holes in the facade. Sarah entered through the front doors, finding Martha McCreary behind the desk tallying damages in her ledger. "Sarah," Martha greeted her with tired eyes. "What can I do for you?" "I need to check Mr. Smith's room," Sarah replied. "Sheriff's business." Martha raised an eyebrow but handed over a key without further question. "Room 3, top of the stairs. He's been out all night helping with the fires. Fine gentleman considering he only arrived 2 days ago." Sarah climbed the stairs to the second floor, her senses alert for any sign of Harrison's return. Room 3 was at the end of the hallway, its door unmarked by the night's violence. She unlocked it and slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The room was Spartan but neat. A single bed with military corners, a wash basin, a small desk, and a wooden chair. Harrison's saddlebags hung over the chair, his rifle propped in the corner. A black coat was draped neatly over the bed. Sarah moved to the saddlebags, first searching through the contents. She found typical travel provisions, jerky, coffee, ammunition, but nothing to indicate his true identity. In the second bag, her hand touched something hard and flat, a wooden case about the size of a small book. She withdrew it carefully, setting it on the desk. The case was locked, but the mechanism was simple, yielding easily to the thin blade of her pocket knife. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a silver badge. Not Pinkerton, as Luke had claimed, but something else entirely. The badge bore the official seal of the United States Federal Marshal Service. Finding what you're looking for? Sarah spun the Colt Navy appearing in her hand, as if conjured. Harrison stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He made no move toward a weapon, though his eyes fixed on the open case on the desk. Federal Marshal, Sarah said, keeping the gun leveled at his chest. Not Maxwell Harrison at all. The name is Harrison, he replied evenly. Marshal Maxwell Harrison assigned to the Arizona Territory last year. He nodded toward the badge. May I come in before someone sees you pointing that gun at a federal officer? Sarah stepped back, allowing him to enter, but keeping the Colt ready. Harrison closed the door behind him, then moved to the chair, sitting down with deliberate slowness. Luke Blackwood said you were a Pinkerton, Sarah said, remaining standing. Luke Blackwood is a liar, Harrison replied, though in this case he was closer to the truth than I would have liked. But you're not Judge Harrison's son. A shadow crossed Harrison's face. I am his son. That part wasn't a lie. But my hunt for you isn't personal vendetta. It's official business. Sarah's eyes narrowed. The pardon cleared me 10 years ago. The pardon cleared Catherine Holloway for the death of Judge Harrison, he corrected. But there are other charges. 14 killings attributed to the Ghost between 62 and 66. Not all of them sanctioned by the Rangers. The accusation hung in the air between them. Sarah's grip tightened on the Colt. I never killed anyone who didn't deserve it, she said quietly. So you were judge, jury, and executioner? Harrison's voice held a note of bitterness. Like you were with my father. Your father was a corrupt judge who sold verdicts to the highest bidder, Sarah countered. The Rangers had evidence. Journal entries, witness testimonies, financial records. I know, Harrison admitted, surprising her. I found his private journal when I was 19, read every sordid detail of his dealings. That's why I became a marshal, to be the kind of lawman he should have been. Sarah studied him, trying to reconcile this revelation with his 16-year hunt. If you knew he was guilty, why pursue me all this time? Harrison met her gaze directly. Because justice isn't about personal feelings. It's about the law. And according to the law, the Ghost's unsanctioned killings require answers. So you tracked me here to arrest me, Sarah concluded. Why not do it immediately? Why the charade? I needed to be certain, Harrison replied, and then I needed to understand who you'd become. The report said the Ghost was cold, methodical, without mercy. But Sarah Morgan, he gestured around them. Sarah Morgan nearly died last night defending a town full of people who don't even know her real name. Sarah's resolve wavered slightly. So what happens now, Marshal? Harrison stood slowly. That depends on you. I came here with a warrant, but after last night, after seeing you risk everything for these people, he shook his head. The woman I was sent to arrest died years ago, I think. And Judge Harrison's son, does he still want revenge? A complex mix of emotions crossed Harrison's face. My father was a deeply flawed man who brought his fate upon himself. I've made peace with that, or I'm trying to. Sarah lowered the Colt Navy slightly but kept it ready. So you're just going to walk away? Pretend you never found me? I didn't say that, Harrison replied. There's still the matter of the law. Before he could elaborate, gunshots erupted from the direction of the doctor's clinic. 3 quick reports, then silence. A signal of trouble. Sarah bolted for the door, Harrison close behind. They emerged onto the hotel's balcony in time to see smoke rising from Palmer's clinic. Figures were running toward it, Sullivan among them. Luke, Sarah said grimly, sprinting down the stairs. By the time they reached the clinic, chaos had erupted. The front room was filled with smoke, and Andrew Palmer lay unconscious near the door, a bloody gash on his temple. Dr. Palmer knelt beside him, frantically checking his pulse. He's alive, she reported as Sarah and Harrison entered. Luke got free somehow, hit Andrew with something heavy, then set fire to the back room as a diversion. Where's Sullivan? Sarah asked, scanning the smoke-filled building. Went after Luke, Dr. Palmer replied, her voice shaking. Said he was heading for the livery stables. Sarah and Harrison exchanged glances. The guns, they said simultaneously. The smithy had burned, but much of Sarah's stock had been moved to the stables for safekeeping after the first signs of trouble. If Luke reached those weapons, he could arm the remaining Ravenclaw men and start the battle anew. They raced toward the stables, cutting through alleys still littered with debris from the night's fighting. As they approached, they heard a single gunshot from inside, followed by a cry of pain. Sarah burst through the doors, the Colt Navy raised and ready. The scene inside froze her blood. Sullivan lay on the ground, blood pooling beneath him, while Luke Blackwood stood over him, a smoking revolver in his hand. Behind Luke, tied to a support post, was a young woman Sarah recognized as Jenny Miller, the blacksmith's daughter. "Drop it," Sarah commanded, aiming at Luke's chest. Luke's broken jaw prevented him from smiling properly, but the malicious gleam in his eyes conveyed his satisfaction. He shifted position, placing himself between Sarah and his hostage. When he spoke, his words were slurred but understandable through his wired jaw. "One step closer and she dies next." He managed, gesturing to Jenny with his gun. Harrison entered behind Sarah, his own weapon raised. "It's over, Blackwood. You're surrounded." Luke laughed, a horrible garbled sound through his broken jaw. "Not over until I say it is." He gestured toward Sullivan's prone form. "Sheriff tried to be a hero. Now look at him." Sarah glanced at Sullivan. He was still breathing, but the blood spreading across his chest suggested the wound was serious. He needed a doctor fast. "What do you want, Luke?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Horses, guns, and you," Luke replied, his eyes fixing on Sarah. "The famous ghost. Still worth something to the right people." "Let the girl go," Harrison interjected. "Then we can discuss terms." Luke's response was to press his gun against Jenny's temple. The girl whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. "No discussion. You two drop your weapons or I paint the wall with her brains." Sarah and Harrison hesitated, caught in an impossible position. If they surrendered their weapons, Luke would almost certainly kill them all. If they didn't, Jenny would die. "All right," Sarah said, finally slowly lowering the Colt Navy. "Just don't hurt the girl." Harrison followed her lead, bending to place his revolver on the ground. Luke watched them with suspicious eyes, clearly considering his next move. "Kick them over," he ordered. As Sarah nudged her weapon across the floor, something caught her eye. A slight movement from Sullivan. The sheriff wasn't as badly wounded as he appeared, and his hand was inching toward the rifle that had fallen beneath the water trough when he was shot. Sarah needed to buy time. "The girl can't ride," she said, drawing Luke's attention. "Let her go. Take me instead. I'm worth more to you anyway." "Why would you sacrifice yourself for her?" Luke demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Because that's who she is." Sullivan's voice came weakly from the floor. "She's Sarah Morgan of Falcon's Edge." Luke's attention shifted momentarily to the sheriff, just long enough for Sarah to lunge forward, tackling Jenny out of his grasp. Harrison dove the opposite direction, drawing a hidden derringer from his boot as he rolled. Luke fired wildly, his bullet splintering wood above Sarah's head. She pushed Jenny toward the door, shielding the girl with her body. Harrison's derringer barked once, twice, the bullet striking Luke in the shoulder and thigh. The outlaw staggered but didn't fall. He swung his revolver toward Sarah, hatred burning in his eyes, finger tightening on the trigger. A rifle shot cracked through the stable. Luke jerked, a look of surprise crossing his ruined face. He toppled forward, revealing Sullivan behind him, the rifle still raised from where he'd fired from the ground. "Nobody threatens my town," the sheriff said weakly before slumping back, the effort of the shot depleting his remaining strength. Harrison moved quickly to secure Luke, though it was immediately clear the outlaw was beyond any earthly justice. The rifle bullet had struck him squarely in the back, severing his spine. Luke Blackwood, the last of the Ravenclaw gang, was dead before he hit the ground. Sarah rushed to Sullivan's side. The sheriff's face was ashen blood, soaking his shirt from a wound high on his chest. "Stupid," she muttered, tearing strips from her own shirt to staunch the bleeding. "What were you thinking, confronting him alone? Trying to make things right?" Sullivan gasped, his breath coming in shallow pants. "For betraying you. By getting yourself killed, that helps no one." Sarah pressed hard on the wound, eliciting a groan of pain. "Harrison, get the doctor." "Now?" Harrison dispatched Jenny to fetch Dr. Palmer, then knelt opposite Sarah. "Bullet missed his heart," he assessed, "but he's losing too much blood." Sullivan's eyes were becoming unfocused. "Sarah," he whispered, "I need to tell you." "Save your strength," she admonished. "Plenty of time for talking later." "No." Sullivan gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Need you to know, I never betrayed you intentionally." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth as he struggled to continue. Drunk, stupid, but never meant to. I know, Ethan, Sarah assured him, her voice gentling. I know. Sullivan's eyes sought Harrison. Take care of her, he managed. She's worth. Worth? His voice trailed off as consciousness slipped away. Sarah continued applying pressure to the wound, her hands slick with blood, her face set in grim determination. She'd seen enough deaths in her life. She wasn't about to let Sullivan become another one, not when he was trying to redeem himself. Dr. Palmer arrived moments later, her medical bag clutched tightly in one hand, Andrew following with a stretcher. The doctor took one look at Sullivan and began issuing rapid-fire instructions. Get him to the clinic, now. Sarah, keep pressure on that wound. Harrison, I need clean water as much as you can carry. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Sullivan was transferred to the clinic where Dr. Palmer extracted the bullet and meticulously repaired the damage it had caused. Sarah assisted, her experience with battlefield wounds proving valuable as the doctor worked to save the sheriff's life. By the time Palmer finally straightened, wiping blood from her hands, the sun was setting on Falcon's Edge. The doctor's face was etched with exhaustion, but a faint smile crossed her lips. He'll live, she announced. It was close, but he's too stubborn to die today. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Despite his betrayal, Sullivan was part of her life in Falcon's Edge, one of the few connections to the past 12 years that still remained after the fire. She stepped outside the clinic to find Harrison waiting on the porch, his face illuminated by the glow of a small cigar. The marshal had cleaned up since the stable confrontation, though fatigue was evident in the lines around his eyes. Sullivan, he asked as she approached. Dr. Palmer says he'll live. Harrison nodded satisfaction. Good, town needs its sheriff. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the last of the day's light fade from the western horizon. Throughout the town, lanterns flickered on as the residents of Falcon's Edge continued the work of rebuilding what had been destroyed. You never finished explaining, Sarah said finally. What happens now with the warrant? Harrison took a long draw on his cigar before answering. Officially, I was sent to investigate reports of Catherine Holloway operating in the Arizona Territory. I found no conclusive evidence to support those reports. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Just like that. The woman I was sent to find died years ago, Harrison continued. In her place is Sarah Morgan, a respected member of this community, who just helped save it from destruction. He met her gaze evenly. That's what my report will say. Why? Sarah asked simply. Harrison was silent for a long moment. When I was a boy watching my father die, I thought I'd witnessed pure evil. As I grew older, I realized the world isn't that simple. Good people do bad things for good reasons. Bad people sometimes act honorably. My father was corrupt, but he loved me. You killed him, but you spent the last 12 years building a life of quiet redemption. He flicked his cigar into the street, watching the ember die in the dust. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about recognizing when a debt has been paid. Sarah absorbed his words, feeling something long knotted within her begin to loosen. And Judge Harrison's son, is his debt paid too? I think, Harrison said slowly, that the boy who watched his father die began to make peace with it last night. Watching you risk everything to save people who didn't even know your real name, it clarified some things. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Palmer appeared in the clinic doorway. Sarah, she called. Sullivan's asking for you. He's weak but lucid. Sarah nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Harrison. Will you be leaving soon? I have a report to file, he confirmed, and other assignments waiting, but I might pass through again someday. You'd be welcome, Sarah said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the offer. Falcon's Edge could use a man who understands the complexity of justice. A ghost of a smile crossed Harrison's face. I'll keep that in mind, Mrs. Morgan. As Sarah turned to enter the clinic, Harrison called after her. The ghost never missed a shot according to the stories. That true? Sarah paused, her hand on the door. That old Colt Navy's never failed to kill with one shot, she replied. But sometimes mercy is the harder target to hit. 3 weeks after the Ravenclaw gang's attack, Falcon's Edge had largely returned to normal. Bullet holes had been patched, broken windows replaced, and buildings repaired. The surviving outlaws had been transported to Tucson to await trial, accompanied by statements from those they had wronged. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Sarah applied a fresh coat of paint to her rebuilt Smithy's porch. The shop had been among the first buildings restored to town, recognizing the importance of having its gunsmith back in business as soon as possible. The sound of hammering echoed from down the street where Daniel Cooper and the surviving Sloan brother were completing repairs on the saloon's roof. In the distance, church bells rang, calling the faithful to Sunday service. A semblance of normalcy had returned to the town, though the scars of that violent night would remain for years to come. "Shop looks better than new," a familiar voice observed. Sarah turned to find Ethan Sullivan watching her from the street, his left arm still in a sling. The sheriff was pale from blood loss and weeks of recuperation, but his eyes were clear and alert. Dr. Palmer had declared his recovery miraculous, though she'd forbidden him from returning to full duties for at least another month. "Returning customers appreciate a place that doesn't look like it was shot to pieces," Sarah replied, setting down her paintbrush. Sullivan climbed the steps carefully, wincing slightly at the effort. "Mind if I sit a spell?" Sarah gestured to the bench she'd installed on the porch, taking a seat beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the town go about its morning business. "Harrison left this for you," Sullivan said, finally producing a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Asked me to deliver it after he'd been gone a week." Sarah accepted the document, recognizing the official seal of the Federal Marshal Service. Inside was a brief message in Harrison's neat handwriting: official report filed. K. Holloway case closed due to insufficient evidence. S. Morgan cleared of all suspicion. Judge Harrison's son sends his regards and gratitude for the lesson in justice. M.H. Beneath the note was a copy of her original pardon, officially registered with the territorial office in Tucson. "He's a good man," Sullivan observed. "Better than his father deserved." "We're all more than our parents made us," Sarah replied, carefully refolding the papers. "Or less. Depends on the choices we make after." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of choices, town council met yesterday. Deary," he shifted to face her directly. "They voted to appoint a deputy sheriff. Your name came up." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I'm a gunsmith, Ethan, not a lawman." "You're both," Sullivan countered. "After what happened with the Ravenclaw gang, people know it. They've seen who you really are, and they want that person watching over them." "Even knowing my history," Sullivan shrugged his good shoulder. "Especially knowing your history. The ghost's reputation for justice might be fearsome, but it's also something this territory respects." He grinned suddenly. "Besides, Jacob Dawson says deputizing the legendary ghost would bring in tourists." The absurdity of it drew a surprised laugh from Sarah. For 12 years, she'd hidden who she truly was, kept her skills and her past locked away like the Colt Navy in its shadow box. Now, with nothing left to hide, the thought of using those abilities openly to protect the home and people she'd come to love held a certain symmetry. "I'll think about it," she promised, though she already knew her answer. After Sullivan departed, Sarah entered her rebuilt shop. The interior was different. New workbenches, new display cases, new tools. But the essence remained the same. Her home, her livelihood, her connection to the life she'd built after leaving the ghost behind. On the wall behind the main counter hung the Colt Navy, 1851, no longer hidden in a shadow box, but displayed proudly on a custom-made stand. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight and balance, a tangible connection between who she had been and who she had become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a deputy's badge perhaps, and all the responsibilities that came with it. But today, in the quiet of her shop with the desert stars visible through the window, Sarah Morgan, once known as the Ghost, was finally completely at peace. 6 months passed. Winter settled over Falcon's Edge, bringing cool nights and crisp mornings to the desert town. The scars of the Ravenclaw attack remained visible in places, a blackened beam here, a patched wall there, but life had largely returned to normal. Sarah Morgan stood on the boardwalk outside her smithy, watching the first light of dawn creep over the eastern hills. The silver deputy's badge pinned to her vest caught the early morning rays gleaming softly against the dark leather. After weeks of consideration, she had accepted Sullivan's offer, dividing her time between gunsmithing and keeping the peace in Falcon's Edge. The arrangement suited the town and suited her. On weekdays, she crafted and repaired the tools of frontier survival in her shop. On weekends, she rode the perimeter, a visible reminder that Falcon's Edge was protected by someone who knew how to handle trouble before it started. "Morning, deputy," called Martha McCreary, sweeping the boardwalk in front of her hotel. "Cold one today." Sarah nodded agreement, her breath visible in the winter air. "Should warm up by noon." "You riding out to the Jenkins place?" Martha asked. "This afternoon. Sheriff thinks they might have seen signs of that cattle rustler who's been working the territory." Martha clucked her tongue in disapproval. Bold coming this close to town after what happened to the last gang that tried. Sarah didn't respond, but the sentiment was clear enough. The story of how Falcon's Edge had stood against the Ravenclaw gang had spread throughout the territory, growing more elaborate with each telling. Some versions claimed Sarah had single-handedly killed 15 men. Others insisted she could shoot the spots off a playing card at 100 paces. None mentioned Catherine Holloway or the ghost, but the legend had attached itself to her new identity all the same. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A lone rider was coming down Main Street, his silhouette dark against the rising sun. As he drew closer, Sarah felt a flicker of recognition. Maxwell Harrison reined in his horse before the smithy, looking much as he had the day he'd left Falcon's Edge. Trail-worn, but composed, his eyes alert beneath the brim of his hat. 6 months of frontier travel had added new lines to his face, and a touch more gray to his temples. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, tipping his hat. "Or should I say, Deputy Morgan now?" Sarah touched her badge absently. "Marshal Harrison. Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Marshal, actually," he corrected, dismounting with fluid ease. "Changed it back to my mother's name. Seemed appropriate." "Cutting ties with the past." Marshall's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Reshaping it, perhaps. May I?" He gestured toward the smithy porch. Sarah nodded, and they moved to the bench where she and Sullivan often sat during quiet moments. Martha McCreary, sensing a private conversation, discreetly returned to her, sweeping at the far end of the boardwalk. "You're looking well," Marshall observed, removing his gloves. "The badge suits you." "Town needed a deputy," Sarah replied simply. "I needed a purpose. Beyond making the finest firearms in the territory." "That's craft," Sarah said. "This is responsibility." Marshall nodded understanding. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had traversed the distance from enemies to something approaching friends through shared danger and revealed truce. "What brings you back to Falcon's Edge?" Sarah finally asked. "More outlaws to chase." "Actually, I came to deliver this." Marshall reached into his coat, withdrawing an envelope sealed with an official stamp. "From the territorial governor's office." Sarah accepted it warily. "Should I be concerned?" "Read it." Marshall suggested, his expression giving nothing away. The envelope contained a single document, formal in its language, profound in its implications. Sarah read it twice to be certain she understood. "A full pardon," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat, "for all actions attributed to Catherine Holloway during and after the war. Signed by the governor himself. And witnessed by a federal judge," Marshall added. "It's ironclad, Sarah. The ghost is officially laid to rest. Forever." Sarah stared at the document, its weight in her hands far greater than the paper it was printed on. "I called in some favors," Marshall admitted. "Presented evidence of your service to the Rangers' testimony about Judge Harrison's corruption, and a detailed account of how Sarah Morgan saved Falcon's Edge from the Ravenclaw gang." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "The ghost may have operated outside the law at times, but she never targeted innocent people. She sought justice when the system failed. The world has changed since then. The governor recognized that." "Why do this?" Sarah asked, carefully refolding the pardon. "After everything," Marshall looked out over the awakening town, considering his answer. "My father kept journals," he said finally, "detailed records of his corruption, his crimes. Reading them as a young man nearly destroyed me. The man I'd idolized was a monster who sentenced innocent people to hang for profit." He turned back to Sarah. "I spent 16 years hunting the ghost because it was easier than facing that truth. Easier to blame you than to acknowledge what he was. But that night, watching you risk everything for this town," he shook his head, "I couldn't pretend anymore." "So this is atonement?" Justice Marshall corrected. True justice, not the counterfeit my father dispensed. Sarah sat with that for a moment, feeling the weight of 16 years of hiding lifting from her shoulders. Thank you, she said simply. Marshall nodded acknowledgement. I'm heading north tomorrow. New assignment in the Dakota Territory. Sounds cold. It is, he agreed with a slight smile. But necessary. Gold was discovered. Where there's gold, there's trouble. And where there's trouble, there's Marshall, Sarah observed dryly. The joke, small as it was, seemed to pleasantly surprise him. Something like that. Before they could continue, Sullivan appeared at the end of the street, making his way toward them, with the careful gait of a man still recovering from a serious wound. In the months since being shot, the sheriff had regained most of his strength, though Dr. Palmer insisted he would never be quite the same. Well, look what the wind blew in, Sullivan called as he approached. Marshall Harrison himself. Marshall now, Sarah corrected. He shed the judge's name. Sullivan raised an eyebrow but nodded approval. Smart move. Coffee at Dawson's, he just opened up. The three of them made their way to the saloon where Dawson was indeed serving breakfast to early risers. They took a table by the window, watching the town come fully awake as the sun climbed higher. How long will you stay? Sullivan asked Marshall. Just today, the marshal replied. Got business in Tucson, then north. Shame, Sullivan said with genuine regret. Town's been quiet, but we could always use another good lawman. Sarah watched the exchange with interest. These two men represented different chapters of her life. Sullivan, the present and future. Marshall, the complicated past. Yet here they sat sharing coffee as if the history between them wasn't written in blood and secrets. The conversation shifted to current events. Cattle rustlers operating in the territory news from the capital, the railroad that might one day reach Falcon's Edge. Normal concerns of a frontier town and the people sworn to protect it. As they talked, Sarah found herself studying Marshall's face, noting how different he seemed from the man who'd arrived 6 months ago, burning with 16 years of hatred. The vengeance that had defined him for so long had been replaced by something more substantial. A genuine commitment to justice, not just for his father, but for all who needed it. Penny for your thoughts, Deputy, Marshall asked, catching her scrutiny. Just thinking about changes, Sarah replied honestly. How people can surprise you. Speaking of surprises, Sullivan interjected, setting down his coffee cup. Doc Palmer's expecting. Sarah raised her eyebrows. Elizabeth is pregnant at 37. Sullivan nodded. Due in summer. Andrew's walking around like a man who can't decide whether to faint or shout from the rooftops. Good for them, Marshall said. Life continues even after tragedy. The observation hung in the air, resonating with each of them in different ways. For Sarah, it echoed her own journey from loss to renewal. For Sullivan, it reflected his recovery from both physical and moral wounds. For Marshall, perhaps, it spoke to his emergence from the shadow of his father's crimes. After breakfast, Marshall announced his intention to have his horse reshod before departing. If you have time, he said to Sarah. I have time, she confirmed. Back at the smithy, Sarah worked in comfortable silence, measuring the horse's hooves, selecting appropriate shoes, heating the forge to working temperature. Marshall watched with evident appreciation for her skill. You're good at this, he observed. Not just the deputy work, but this too. I had a good teacher, Sarah replied, referring to her late husband. Robert believed in doing things right the first time. He sounds like a wise man. He was, Sarah agreed, memories of Robert Morgan warming her despite the years that had passed since his death. He knew who I was when we married. Knew everything. Never judged, just loved. You were fortunate to find him. Yes, Sarah said, simply returning her attention to the task at hand. As she worked the hot metal, shaping it with practiced strikes of her hammer, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the young ranger known as the Ghost, to the widow reinventing herself in a dusty frontier town, to the deputy now trusted to protect the community she'd come to love. Life was rarely simple, but sometimes it offered second chances to those willing to earn them. The task completed, Sarah stepped back to assess her work. That should hold him for a good long while, she told Marshall. Strong shoes for rough country. Marshall paid her fee without haggling, then lingered, clearly having more to say. Finally, he reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small wooden box. "I've been meaning to return this," he said, holding it out to her. "Found it among Luke Blackwood's possessions after he died." Sarah opened the box to find a faded daguerreotype in a simple frame. A young girl with Sarah's eyes and Robert's smile stared back at her. Grace, their daughter, lost to fever all those years ago. The photograph had been taken from their home during the fire that claimed Robert's life, an irreplaceable memento she'd mourned almost as much as her husband. "Where did he get this?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I don't know," Marshall admitted, "but I thought you should have it back." Sarah traced the outline of her daughter's face with a gentle finger. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means more than you can know." Marshall nodded, understanding in his eyes. Without further ceremony, he mounted his horse, settling into the saddle with the ease of a man accustomed to long rides through difficult country. "If you're ever in Dakota territory," he offered, "look me up. And if you're passing through Falcon's Edge again," Sarah returned, "there's always coffee at Dawson's." Marshall tipped his hat in acknowledgement, then turned his horse toward the southern trail. Sarah watched him go, this man who had hunted her for 16 years, only to become, against all odds, something like a friend. As his silhouette disappeared into the distance, she touched the deputy's badge on her vest, then the photograph in her hand. The past and present now reconciled. Not forgotten, but accepted, integrated into the woman she had become. Inside the smithy, the Colt Navy 1851 gleamed on its stand, a reminder of where she'd come from and what she'd survived. Sarah placed the photograph of Grace beside it, completing the circle of her life's journey. Through the window, she could see Falcon's Edge spread out before her, the town she'd helped save, the home she'd finally claimed without reservation. Sullivan was making his rounds, nodding to townsfolk going about their morning business. Dr. Palmer emerged from her clinic, her condition not yet visible, but knowing it gave her steps a new lightness. Daniel Cooper rode in from his ranch, likely bringing news about the rustlers. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that the legendary ghost walked among them every day. Not as a specter of vengeance, but as a protector, a craftsman, a neighbor. Sarah Morgan had found her place in the world, and Catherine Holloway could finally rest. She picked up her tools and returned to work, the rhythmic ringing of her hammer joining the everyday sounds of Falcon's Edge. Outside, a shaft of sunlight broke through the winter clouds, bathing the town in golden warmth. Where the light touched, shadows retreated, not vanishing entirely, but diminishing, becoming parts of a larger, more complex picture. Just like the shadows in Sarah's own past, now merely elements of a life well lived rather than defining it. The Colt Navy that had never failed to kill with one shot now stood as testament to a simple truth. Even the deadliest weapon could find peace when the hand that wielded it discovered something worth protecting. And Sarah Morgan had found exactly that in Falcon's Edge. Not just a hiding place, but a home. Not just people to lie to, but a community to serve. Not just existence, but life rich and meaningful, despite its sorrows. The ghost had vanished at last, leaving only the woman behind. And as winter gave way to spring, as new life emerged from the harsh desert soil, Sarah Morgan looked forward to whatever came next with the steady confidence of someone who had faced her demons and emerged at long last into the light. The desert holds its secrets like a miser clutches gold. 16 years of running, 16 years of hunting, all to end in a town too small for most maps, yet large enough to contain both redemption and retribution. They say you can't outrun your shadow. Perhaps they're right. Sarah Morgan, once Catherine Holloway, once the ghost stopped running when she found something worth standing for. A town, a purpose, a second chance that cost more blood than anyone should have to pay. Falcon's Edge still bears the scars of that violent night, bullet holes filled, but never forgotten, buildings rebuilt, but forever changed. Just like the woman who now wears a deputy's badge over the heart that once beat only for vengeance. The Colt Navy rests on its stand, no longer hidden, no longer a weapon of judgment, but a reminder of choices made and prices paid. Its legend lingers in whispered stories told around campfires, growing with each telling, while the truth remains known only to those who lived it. In the end, perhaps we all seek the same elusive peace, that moment when our shadows no longer stretch before us, like accusations, but fall behind us like memories. The moment when we stop being ghosts and start being human again. What would you sacrifice for such a moment? What would you forgive